Hi, my name is Mike Ward. I'm the Global Director of Content in Pharma Insights, the publishers of Pink Sheet, Scrip and In Vivo. I'm here at the BioEurope Spring Meeting in Barcelona, where pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies and investors are all getting together to discuss some of the issues that are driving the industry at the moment, what the hot trends are, but also an opportunity for people to either engage in new transactions or to talk about some of the transactions they've got already in place. I'm now joined by Kevin Cox, who's the CEO of Imanova, which is a UK-based imaging company.
Yes.
But interestingly, your imaging company, when people sort of think about imaging, they normally think about diagnostics, and it's kind of almost like a static process.
Yeah.
But you are very much involved in the use of imaging as part of the drug development process.
That's right.
So, yeah, how is that going? Is that something that is getting a lot of engagement?
It is. It's interesting. So we call ourselves a translational biomedical imaging company, and you're right. All of our work, pretty much, is involved in helping the drug development process, and we're particularly involved at that translational phase. So it's taking the drugs out of animals into humans for the first time. And I don't know if you recall, but there was a phrase coined by Pfizer a couple of years ago called the 3 pillars of drug survival.
Yeah.
And that is, quite frankly, does the drug get to the tissue? Does it hit the target at the right levels? And does it do anything when it gets there? Yeah. Now, our technology allows us to provide that information in man. So we're actually doing most of our imaging in humans rather than relying upon the information coming from animals. Yeah. And that's really where the translational concept comes in. So if you have this knowledge of what the drug is, where it's going, what it does, and so on, it allows you more confidence in taking a decision to take a drug through then into later phase clinical trials. So we not only help them at that phase by reducing the amount of effort required to get information on dosing, we also help them to determine whether or not to take a drug forward, and therefore whether to incur the, as you know, the huge investment and expense of late phase clinical trials. And that's really the area that we focus on.
So have you sort of managed to sort of put a number in terms of sort of like almost like the economic benefit of, for example, taking your approach rather than maybe the sort of the conventional approach that people would do, for example, on the dosing, etc.?
We have, and it's clearly one of the numbers more interesting to people is actually real money rather than future money.
Yeah.
If you're talking about saving costs of clinical trials in the future, people tend not to value it too greatly. But what we've done is we've looked at the phase in which we operate, which tends to be sort of Phase I, Phase IIa, and we assess that you could save something in the order of £2 million in that phase by reducing the number of experiments you need to do in an ascending dose type of study, but also it saves about 6 months off the program if the information we provide is useful then in the dosing going into the next phase.
And I mean, the whole clinical trial process though is highly regulated, so what engagement have you had with regulators, or what acceptance have you had from regulators about what you're able to offer?
It's an interesting one. So you mentioned at the beginning we're not involved in diagnostics per se. That's really where the regulations start to kick in. When you're using imaging in the way we use it for decision-making purposes, it is actually not regulated at all. So it's really an internal decision-making process that gives the confidence then to the drug developers as to what they want to do at the next stage. The data we provide invariably is not incorporated in any regulatory package. So therefore it doesn't really have the sort of regulations that you'd normally see.
But it's one of these things that the companies can, it gives them a sort of a level of comfort of Absolutely. It gets to the right place at the right time, and it does what you're hoping.
That's correct. Yeah, not always applicable, but we're finding increasing applications for the technology.
So you offer this as a service to pharmaceutical and biotech companies?
Absolutely.
How does it work?
Yes, so we're a service company, and we work with pharmaceutical companies of all shapes and sizes, largely in the CNS. It's where the technology has had most acceptance so far, but we're beginning to investigate opportunities outside the brain as well. And basically we operate like any CRO, although we're not a traditional CRO in that respect. And we have very, very clear ways of working with pharmaceutical companies, and we have good processes which allow them to meet the timelines they need in delivering the studies. And I suppose the thing that we differentiate ourselves on is that we also have an in-house capability to develop novel imaging biomarkers.
Right.
So there are some existing biomarkers out there for known targets, but interestingly, we're increasingly finding people are looking at new types of biology, particularly in areas like dementia, for which there are novel targets they're investigating, but there are no suitable imaging biomarkers for those targets.
And how do you validate those biomarkers? I mean, because pharmaceutical companies can be very, very conservative. So, how does that process work?
So what we do is we work with them at an early stage. Let's say they've got a lead compound which they selected from a molecular library. We can often take that library and identify a suitable imaging biomarker of the same, if you like, chemical series, but not the lead compound. We then work it through preclinical investigation and then moving into humans. So obviously we're validating it then in humans to make sure it's selectively hitting the target, and more importantly that it actually can be displaced by their drug. And that gives them confidence then that this information can be used in their future studies.
And can you share with us any sort of interactions you've had with pharmaceutical companies where you're either working with them or you've helped them?
We don't typically announce specifically who we're working with, but the sort of areas we have been involved in are things like, or looking at in the dementia field, we're looking at novel targets beyond the alpha-synuclein and tau, where people, obviously in light of some of the recent problems people have had, they're looking at new targets. But there's one area specifically that we have where we've developed a precompetitive consortium to try and develop these biomarkers as suitable tools for early diagnosis of disease, dementias, but also monitoring disease progression, so that they can understand if their drug is having an impact on that disease progression.
All right, so and this precompetitive consortium, so you have a number of pharma and biotech companies?
We do, correct, yes. So this has been established, and we've just recently announced it, and it incorporates funding from the Medical Research Council, incorporates funding from Imperial College London, and also AbbVie. It was one of the pharmaceutical companies that have already bought into the consortium, and we have a number of other companies who are on the cusp of joining us in this process.
Okay, so it's a club that they can join.
That's right, and it's sort of an open innovation approach. So if they invest in this program, they get access to the data generated from the program to be able to use in their internal drug development processes.
Okay. Now, it's sort of a lot of imaging. It requires big kits.
Yes.
So, what sort of investments are you having to make, and how do you finance that work?
Well, you're absolutely right, and I think that's one reason why people have in the past been put off in the use of imaging, because quite frankly it's expensive technology, so it has to add value. But to do it successfully, and we do primarily two modalities, PET imaging and MRI. And PET imaging, for those who don't know, requires a radio-labeled molecule to be injected into people. So what we have is all the capabilities required to generate the isotopes. We use fluorine-18 and carbon-11, incorporate that into a molecular, into the molecule, purify it, characterize it, and then inject it into people. So we have all of that capability. We have cyclotrons, we have hot cells for radiochemistry, but we also have the scanning capability in-house as well. And that's the area where, of course, there's large expenditure. Now, we inherited this facility from GSK. It was GSK's imaging center, and they spun it out as an independent company, Imanova, and we now therefore enjoy, if you like, the investments they made in the facility. But these technologies have finite lifetime, and so at some point we are going to need to consider replacing some of those large pieces of kit, and that's therefore important for us to have a business which can justify that level of investment into the future.
And so you out looking for investors as well as potential customers?
We are in the process, yes, that's right, of sort of understanding what is our next phase. We've been going for 5 years now. We're a profitable organisation, but to continue to grow, we do need to get additional investment, in part to replace big pieces of equipment, but also to build capabilities beyond where we currently operate today.
Well, Kevin, pleasure seeing you again, and thanks for sharing the story.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you. Thanks a lot.